All right, so real quick, I'm going to try and walk you guys through. This is like digital study guide again. I put everything on Classroom as far as like where the quotes are going to be coming from, all of that jazz. I also put like a narrowed down list of multiple choice. So what I'm going to do in this video as quickly as possible is just give you a heads up on what you need to be thinking about as in regards to all those quotes, and then also I'll walk you through a little bit of kind of multiple choice stuff. Make sure you kind of are on the same page with me on that. But I'm going to start with the quotes because I think that's the part that's maybe like what freaks you out the most. So I'm going to walk you through that. On Classroom, I did not only give you like page numbers, I gave you the actual quotes. And so what you're going to see there, I'm scrolling through it right now as I look at this, it will tell you who the quote is by. So you have your two possible Twain quotes, and then you have like your Hart quote, your Freeman quote, Bierce, whatever. And so it tells you what page number that is so that you can kind of look and kind of contextualize that a little bit. But it also is going to tell you specifically if you had this quote, it's going to look exactly like that. Okay, so like word for word, this is what I'm looking at. So that will hopefully be helpful as you study tomorrow. So while I'm gone, I would highly recommend like pull up those quotes, start kind of like breaking them down. Make sure you understand each element of what's going on there. Okay. And so with the Twain quotes, the first one is from 235 or 1235 in your book. And this is the Jim quote, like the classic Jim telling us about his daughter, what happened there, that whole situation where he doesn't realize something about her. Okay, so that's what's happening there. And this quote, like both of the Twain quotes, like the ones I've given you, are like big like characterization moments. So we get Twain telling us something about his character, specifically in this one, Jim, that we hadn't picked up on yet. So we see like kind of a transition of characterization there. And we also are seeing like the deeper side of Jim. Like what is it that makes him tick, and why does he feel so bad about what happens here? That's what you should be thinking about there. So it's describing a situation with his daughter. Why does he feel so terrible? What happened there? The 1271 is another insight into this time Huck. And so this is where Huck determines for the first time that he is 100% going to help Jim. Okay. And when he does that, he makes that statement that he is not only okay with this, but he realizes that making this decision in his mind is going to condemn him to hell. Okay. And so he says that like, I am resolved to do this. And because I'm resolved to do this, I realize the condemnation that is going to bring me, and I'm going to accept that. So this tells us a lot about Huck. So think about that. Think about what he's saying there. Think about the significance of that. That's the 1271. Those are your only two possible Twain quotes. Then Hart, you've only got one. This one's pretty straightforward. It's from 1333. A lot of threes in that quote. And this is when Tennessee gets caught. Okay, so you want to be looking at what's the scenario, like what's happening, where is he at when he gets caught, what are they doing when he gets caught, who is it that catches him, okay, and how is it that he catches him. That's what's going on there. So it's just, this one's strictly descriptive of a setting, or of a scene rather. So tell me what's happening in that scene. But the little hint I'll give you is this is when you catch Tennessee. Or, well, you didn't. The guy who did. Then Freeman quote, it's only one. It's actually one of your questions as well, as far as multiple choice goes. So you're going to get this one in one form or another on the test, almost guaranteed. Okay. So this is from 1330. That's when Louisa Ellis kind of has this like remark at the end. So after everything has gone on, and she decides not to get married. And all of society at that time would have said that that was a huge mistake. Okay, but that was what she was made for, and that's what she was supposed to do. And so she compares that to when Jacob and Esau have their interaction, and Esau gives up his birthright for something that didn't actually really matter. But she says that's not what happened to her. Okay, she might have given up something that people thought she shouldn't have, but she feels differently about it. Why? Okay, that's what you want to answer. Why does she feel differently about that? Okay, then your Bierce quote is, there's two of them. The first one is from 1419. And it's just one little line. It starts with, death is a dignitary. So he's describing how people perceive death and how they interact with it. Like, it doesn't matter who you are. Everyone kind of has the same sort of reaction to death. What is that? Okay, so what is he saying that people do when they encounter death. And then he specifically makes a comment about how the military kind of respects death. Okay, so what do people do? What does the military do? Then 1422, you have the quote that starts, the intellectual part of his nature was already effaced. And so what he's looking at here is a description of when Farquhar is about to be hung, okay, and what's going through his mind when all the intellectual part is gone. He's just feeling, okay, so it's just that physical side where it's very naturalist, okay, remember, it's like a very naturalist piece. And so what is he saying that experience is like for him when like the mind is overwhelmed? What happens? Okay, and specifically, like, I'm not saying broad sense, but in this scene, what happens to Farquhar when his mind is overwhelmed? Okay, then the Gilman quote is, I don't know, it's like the end of the story. Some of you said you did not find this as creepy as I do, but it's a creepy story, and we didn't get to talk about it as much. So I highly recommend that you watch that video that I posted at the bottom of this as well. This being the classroom stream, if you're on there. But basically, just quickly summarizing that story, we see like the slow degeneration of this woman's sanity, right? Like she's slowly going insane to where she thinks that there's something behind this wallpaper. At first, she doesn't like it, and it's driving her crazy. And there's all kinds of like wonderful descriptive language as she's describing why she doesn't like this. The husband thinks that she just needs some rest, and that's going to cure this mental illness that she has. And so she's kind of locked into this room and not really allowed to leave because it's not good for her. And it's actually starting to drive her more and more insane. And so she keeps thinking she sees these women, then she sees them like behind the wallpaper, like trying to get out. And so then she wants to get this woman out. And so she's like ripping off all the wallpaper, trying to do that. And then at the end of the story, all of a sudden, like she is the woman. And so this woman that she thought was in this wallpaper, like creeping around, like she is like putting her shoulder into the wall. Like she's kind of like created a groove in the wall because she's crept like around this wall so often. Her husband comes in, like, because she had locked the door, and the husband comes in and he's like, what's going on? And he sees her like, crawling around on the ground, and like he passes out, and she's like, oh man, why do you have to pass out right there? Now I have to like creep over him all the time. And she just keeps like crawling around the room. And when she comes to her husband, she just sort of like crawls over the top of him. So that's like the scene that's being described there. So you're welcome. I give you quite a bit on that one. Then the last two, you have Jack London quotes. The first one, very beginning of the story, we're getting this description of the male character, the man, the human character, I guess, is the main character of this story. And it describes like what he's like. This one describes what his weakness is. Okay, so what I really want you to pay attention to is it tells us why he does not realize that this is as big of a deal as it really is. Like, what is it about how he views the world that makes him naive or makes him unable to really see the severity of the situation that he's in? That's what that quote is from. And so it's like the trouble with him is that he was without imagination. And it goes down to it did not lead him to understand the immortality and man's place, mortality and man's place in the universe is where that ends. Okay, then the last quote is also from To Build a Fire. In the handout originally, it would have been like the third page, but it's the sentence that starts, suddenly it broke through, floundered on one side, got a firmer footing, and then it ends with, it merely obeyed the mysterious prompting that arose from the deep creps of its being. This is describing the dog, okay, and how he goes into the water and what he does to survive. And it's really like the dog is nature, okay? Remember that. Like, what is he saying about the dog? Because this quote is like the exact opposite of the quote that describes the man. Like, the man has all these flaws, and therefore he dies. The dog, though, has something that the man does not have. What is it? Okay? And so that should walk you through the quotes. Having them there and kind of knowing those starting points should get you going. Okay. Then, as far as multiple choice questions, I narrowed that down for you a little bit. I'll kind of walk through real quick, just give you kind of a quick overview of what's going on there. Make sure you're going the right direction. So number 2 and 3 in the age of realism, realism and naturalism are both defined in the slideshow, and that slideshow is on my website. I'll go ahead and like link it to this classroom post as well, but it's like word for word what I'm looking for there is for you. So realism, remember, you have like the Civil War plus Darwinism comes together, and creates this need to look at the world the way that it really is. Okay. And so, like this emphasis on characters, emphasis on like practical applications of our story, vernacular diction, like these like really kind of normal events, not anything real mystical or anything like that. But it's a little more optimistic than naturalism, which takes all of that, but says no, the world is amoral. So it's not, there's no morality in nature, but nature is always going to win because ultimately nature is stronger than humanity. And so all life is, ultimately futile, and you will eventually die. Okay. Then for the Twain questions, number one and number two, number one, I hope everybody knows Samuel Clemens. Number two, which author was it that said that Huck Finn was the like where all American writing comes from, and there hasn't been anything as good since? That is Mr. Hemingway. Okay, Ernest Hemingway is the answer to that. And we talked about that on the slides. Then number 11, what was it about him, or about Miss Watson rather, and the widow Douglas that Huck finds like so upsetting? And that was that he was trying to like educate him and give him religion. Like he resented those two things in particular. Then number 18, what reaction does he know, or what action rather does he know that Widow Douglas would be proud of him for doing? And it was like helping those robbers out on the steamboat, because she always also helped people who were down and out. That's also when he says he might be a murderer someday too, so it's good to help those guys. Number 26, what's so strange about the Shepherdson and the Granford's church services? Like they all go and listen to these preachings, these messages on like brotherly love and everything, but then they carry their guns with them and like sit with the guns on their laps like while they're listening. So kind of that, like, we are not actually taking seriously what is being said. Then what is it that Huck says that he won't tell all about because it makes him sick? That one is the feud between the Shepherdsons and the Granfords. Like don't be thrown off if like I include Buck's death in there, because he does actually tell us about Buck's death. What he doesn't tell us about is everything else that happens during that feud. Like he doesn't even want to talk about it. So we are left to assume that there's all kinds of senseless death and terrible things happening to these people who actually have a lot of respect for each other. But that's what they've always done, and so that's what they do. All right, then I'm going to flip over here and make sure this is still recording, so I'm not just talking. Hey, it is. Okay. Then the next question. Hold on, let me turn the page and I'll tell you. 41 for Huck Finn. And so we're looking at which sister does he consider to be most beautiful and full of sand. So that was Mary Jane. And when it says sand, it's like she's brave and she has grit and she's honest and she has what he considers to be like real fortitude. Okay. Then number 44, this is one of the quotes we talked about. So when he decides he's going to help Jim, what is it that he declares? He says, all right, I'll go to hell, right? Like he determines that he is going to condemn himself for this action, but he can't help himself, right? Then 49, what's ironic about the grindstone scene with Jim, that's when like they set him free and then put him back in the jail, if you remember that scene. So like they let him out and then they like have him carry this grindstone that was too heavy, and then they put him back in and like lock him back up, all in an attempt to rescue Jim, right? 53, what makes us realize that Tom's actions, like all that stuff that he made Jim go through, what made it so incredibly cruel? It was that Jim was already free, right? So he, by the entire time, like everything was pointless. Okay, then Bret Hart questions. Number 1, he rode shotgun for Wells Fargo. And then his primary contribution to American Lit was that vivid characterization of Western America, or the frontier. Which, did I include the Mark Twain like primary contribution? The question is that. Yeah, you should probably know that one as well. So, because that will probably be on there. So the primary contribution of Mark Twain to American Lit is that he's that master American humorist, and that master of vernacular writing. He is also what I would say is like a key shaper of what it means to be American lit. I forgot to put a star on that one. So I'll add that back to the list on Classroom as well. Okay, so then your Mary Wilkins Freeman questions. Number one, she's primarily known as, so this is like her primary contribution as well, a New England realist, and she is like the portrayer of authentic New England life. So like remember, like the Southern writers were kind of taking center stage here, and then she comes in and writes about New England. Okay. The other thing, number 8, I already explained because that's the quote. Okay, so I like just see the earlier part of the video. Okay. Then Ambrose Bierce, number 1, primary contribution to American lit is that he is that brutal satirical realist. So brutal satirical realist. And how does the ending of that piece represent realism? Well, there's that tragic, inevitable death, right? So that is realism, or naturalism rather, to a T. Okay, everything seems like it's going to work out, and then it doesn't. Number 1 for Miss Gilman. Her primary contribution is that she is an early feminist voice. She's also an activist writer for many causes. And then number 7, what does she begin? Why does she begin locking the door during the day? It's because she does that so that she can have more freedom to creep around the room. And then number 8 at the end, when she sees the creeping women at the window, she wonders if they all came out of the wallpaper like she did. Okay, so she's starting to realize, oh, hey, maybe I escaped this wallpaper, right? And then number 10, in the end, when John finally comes in, the narrator is frustrated because now she has to creep over him, like he's in her way, like she wants to keep creeping. Then for Jack London, his primary contribution, number 1, is that he's the master American naturalist. He also wrote Call of the Wild and White Fang, which are 2 like quintessential American classics. And then number 3, which 2 philosophers most influenced London's writing and his kind of worldview was Marx and Nietzsche, or I would say Nietzsche, but you take it for how you will. Then number 7, what phrases are frequently repeated, and how did these messages contribute to the meaning of the piece? And so the ones that were repeated are, it certainly was cold, he was no better off, and the old timer was right. Those are the 3 that were most repeated. It certainly was cold. I would say that's kind of like some nonchalance there. So it's more than just cold, right? So he's like, oh yeah, it's kind of cold out here. So it sort of shows his attitude, which never really seems to connect how serious this is to the reality of the situation until much later in the piece. Then he was no better off. That's naturalism, okay? Because it didn't matter what he did, it wasn't going to matter. And then the old timer was right. That's kind of like some foreshadowing, like of the kind of him realizing his fate. Okay. Then that should be everything, I believe. So yeah. So that is like in a pretty quick overview what this test will have in it. So feel free to watch this tomorrow during your time with the sub, and we will take this thing on Friday. So if you have any questions or anything like that, do not hesitate to let me know. All right. Have a great day. Make wise decisions. I will see you on Friday. Merry Christmas.